My name is Matt Stone, and I'm here to talk to you about the wonderful world of Windows. In particular, we're going to cover some things around security, compliance, and patching today. So about me, just find those things. I'm trying to be concise and save a little time here. I'm that twit at the top, and you can find me on the Puppet community if you ever want to talk further on this stuff. So today I'm going to challenge a couple of things. And for starters, to get you in the right mindset, some of you may be new to Puppet, some of you may be very old hand at it. So let's think holistically about our infrastructure. Let's take silos out of everything here, and let's just try to get that overall holistic view of everything going on. Now, if you're a Puppet user, you might already understand this. You're slicing and dicing your infrastructure in certain ways. You kind of know how to grasp that concept. If not, there's a switch you make when you start working with infrastructure as code and start getting out of that kind of the older way of, we'll call it legacy. I like legacy, right? The legacy way of administrating Windows servers. And the thing is, Puppet, especially now, is an incredible set of tools for all these various aspects of automation. And once you have the tools that allow you to manage all the things, at least the way my brain's wired, you tend to think about all the things that you have to manage, right? So that's the one thing to think about here. I start thinking about all the things I need to manage. And today we're going to kind of talk about security and how that belongs in that process. So, why am I here selling you Puppet? Other than being on a stage at Puppetize, other than working for Puppet, give you some context about why I feel you should use it. I used to be a customer, and if I go into the Wayback Machine, I actually have a slide from 2016. Doesn't seem that long ago, but I got too many kids, I don't sleep much. And this was a talk around group policy, and my relative disdain for it. I'm still beating this drum, and I thought people needed to start working with more infrastructure as code styles in Windows for these very reasons, right? We got to get out of the clicking and next, okay, and actually thinking more about the process behind things. And there's all these benefits of starting to work with infrastructure as code, so we're encouraging those consistent, reliable behaviors. And oddly enough, if we have consistent, reliable behaviors, our servers tend to have more consistent and reliable behaviors, so it's good for all of us. Once we can start expressing our infrastructure as code, we actually can start having more transparent processes. And this means we can easily share with other people. We can actually see what it is we're doing instead of, like the old movie called Cube, where everybody's building something different, and now you're in a horror machine. So over this, it also encourages us to work together, right? We need to start jumping across some silos, and I've talked about this before. There's a good division between Linux and Windows, right? There's the, ew, Windows, and that's fine. But there's also some division between like the guy building the infrastructure for Windows, the guy controlling the identity management for Windows, the guy with like an SCCM for Windows that you don't get to touch any of that stuff. And we need to pull all the Windows camp together. It's like Earth coming together to fight the oncoming alien threat, right? And we just bring everybody into one piece here. So let's talk about what we tend to automate and what we tend to leave on the table. I talk to a lot of customers these days, and from my own experience, we tend to be on the left side of this, right? We start with the OS resource, the NTPs of the world get started here, and we start doing some very small things. But that eventually builds up to building a profile for how Windows should look. And maybe there's a couple of security things in there, right? Same thing, we get to applications. We can stand up IIS or SQL Server. We can start doing some magic there. Maybe we get to the point where we start having corporate profiles for things like SQL Server or specific to actual app teams that are going to need it, so they have a specific configuration. Now, to the right of this, we're talking very specific security profiles. OS security is one. I'm starting to see more of it, but it tends to be something that's just not addressed other than things in the OS baseline. Application security, I ask this to everybody I start talking about their environment, but I wish I had the stat, but it's got to be in the high 80 percentile of people that just turn off the firewall, turn off SE Linux, turn off anything that might actually have some sort of security that you can work on locally. It's the last thing anybody is thinking about in context of this, but we have ways to abstract and automate that, and we should definitely be bringing that in. Also, the administrative and maintenance tasks. If you're working specifically on an infrastructure side, you tend to build and punt, right? Like we built the machine, now it's the app teams. And we don't want to know about it until something breaks and they come at us with it. When you look at the two sides, it's typically the stuff on the left we can control. It's the stuff to the right that starts involving those other teams. And if we're not building those connections with the other teams, working with them and trying to show the value of what we're able to do with our infrastructure code, we're not making any progress in that area. So typical collaboration possibilities here. Most people I talk to, they are the IT ops, something in platform infrastructure, whatever you want to call that. Maybe the OG DevOps team before there were containers in the world. Maybe you're the puppet people. Hopefully you're not the puppet person. Is there any one puppet person? You're the puppet guy that's yeah, I'm sorry, I owe you a drink later. And so you're dealing with these different challenges here. So the one big one with me was security teams. And the most successful I ever was with security was actually realizing that you can take this Word document of all the controls they want and puppetize it. I don't say there's no Microsoft Word to Puppet converter, so don't worry about that. But by being able to translate what they were doing in Word into code, making it readable, putting comments, self-documenting in the code, we were able to flip it from an ops team and a security team that didn't want to talk to each other to a once-a-month meeting where we just reviewed a manifest and looked down and said, hey, this is working. Hey, we have new controls we want to put in. It's our job to write them. All we need to ask them to do is supply what it is they need. Application teams, this gets a little more fun because application teams might not want to adopt doing Puppet and pushing things into the control repo and all these kind of things. And there's been some work around how you can take a lot of the pain out of that. But also now with stuff like Bolt and connecting that to Puppet Enterprise, you have the ability to say, give them some autonomy, but still be able to make the systems comply to whatever your OS or security standards are. And so when we go down the list, there's challenges with all these things that really comes down to you as the person writing infrastructure code. I do like that phrase, is we somehow become infrastructure developers in our world. You are the one that has the subject expertise as to how to do that and how to get it to work in your organization. They are the ones that are the subject matter experts on their end, and how we can get that tied together and build trust is really, it's more of a people problem than a technology problem because we can kind of solve it. So where can Puppet help? This is where we just kind of go through the tools that are available to us today and what you could be doing outside of what you're currently able to do in your environment. So the first thing is you may have seen this before. This is the Windows Power Pack on the Puppet Forge. Needs a spiffier name. But common modules that you can use. Okay, we have a ton of modules available. You can do a lot of management of Windows systems. ACLs, you can get Chocolatey installed. Shout out. You can do DSC integrations. So you want desired state configuration under Microsoft. You can actually tie Puppet into that. Start using Hyra, Factor, all these wonderful things, but actually have DSC push out at the end of it, and all the way down. So there's these, but when I talk to people, one of the bigger issues here is that we need to extract what they've currently done and get them into infrastructure as code. So if I come to you today and I'm like, you have group policy. Well, okay, you have group policy, you got 20 years of group policy, that's organic and crusty because guess what? You've acquired 47 companies in the last 20 years. Maybe some of those got merged, maybe some of those didn't. But people are now like literally afraid to touch it. We should not live in fear of our infrastructure. I'll die on this hill until they're actually sentient and they're coming after us. But so that's the one thing. How do we address GPO? And I've talked about that before, and a lot of it was like, go get those modules, figure it out. And I'll kind of get to that in a minute. The other piece here, PowerShell scripts, which is great versus when I started doing this years ago and nobody was really actively doing a lot of PowerShell. Now there's a ton of great content out there. But I start talking to shops that are like, hey, we started writing our own scripts. But, well, Ed wrote the scripts. They're on his laptop. I have an older version of it on mine that I use, and these guys go in the GUI. How do we centralize that effort? How do we make it like versionable? How do we use these workflows we're learning as we're starting to work in more of that infrastructure as code style? Borrow what's great about the process of working with Puppet code, but actually give some people a little more autonomy to work within PowerShell instead of having to conform everything to desired state configuration. And then we're not going to talk batch files today. They exist. You can run them. If you can convert them to PowerShell, go ahead, but I hope they're all dead soon. So let's talk GPO. Where do we go with GPO? Okay, I've never been a big fan of GPO, mostly because coming up as an admin, or like even starting as like a junior admin, GPO was the thing that like the big boys had, and you couldn't touch it, but for some reason your system didn't work, and you had to figure out why, and you had to troubleshoot why something would work or wouldn't. You had to troubleshoot why McAfee's getting installed on a SQL server and slowing things down and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of what started my battle with, hey, we need to get this visible. We need to be transparent in what we're actually applying to systems. So what does GPO bring to the table? We'll go back to that original slide. Technically, it encourages consistent, reliable behavior if you know it's actually working. But you lose all your visibility. You lose that transparency. You lose, does anybody collaborate on GPOs? Okay, cool. Answered my question for me. So, I mean, it was a configuration management tool that it's like ancient by tech standards, right? And so, yes, they may have newer versions or whatever they're gonna do with it, but we have tools around the configuration management that specifically address those needs for transparency and compliance and continual enforcement and all these wonderful things. But, the GPO, it's hard to get out of. So, again, you might not know what it's doing. You have descriptions, so don't show the shutdown message. It's not necessarily a registry key, right? It's maybe under the hood somewhere, but you don't actually know that from looking in the group policy console. Again, it can get crusty over time, and some of those controls can't really be managed, as I've seen yet, outside of group policy management. But I want to propose something, and if anybody wants to run with this with me, you're more than welcome to. But I'm going to go to PowerShell. I just recorded this, so I'm not going to actually touch a key, but very tiny font, but it's too late to go back to the home lab. And this is using a little bit of PowerShell and the baseline management module from Microsoft, and essentially exporting my default domain policy directly into DSC resources, and from there into Puppet. So that process took like 10 to 15 seconds, exported those policies. There was one that the Microsoft baseline management module says, hey, we don't support exporting this to a resource, but now we actually have Puppet resources. So I was actually able to do this, and the beautiful part is I was able to do this and disable group policy, and that's my home lab runs off of Puppet now, which I thought was kind of neat. Even better, when we talk about that transparency and moving into infrastructure as code workflows, I can go into Visual Studio Code, where now I have linting and validation on that client side, kick it into continuous delivery for Puppet Enterprise, where I now have this CI/CD pipeline that's doing testing, validation, and my favorite thing, impact analysis. So I am changing my minimum password length. I now know the affected nodes in the organization. I can direct the deployment out to them, and I can see if those changes are actually taking effect or not. That essentially gets us to transparent GPO, which makes me kind of happy if it works. The idea here that we can look at the node graph in Puppet, and we can see, as part of all of our other things that are being done to this box, we're also managing all of this as part of group policy. Now, again, Microsoft will even admit there's things that can't come out of group policy yet, but it's a start, and it's a way to get going quickly and kind of work that from there. So this, I'll have a link at the end of the deck. If anybody would like to help make that thing work a lot nicer, I would like to get you out of your GPO today. Doesn't sound right. All right, so what's this mean? We're expressing group policy as Puppet code. We get to use the best of what Puppet can do, the best of what desired state configuration can do. We can collaborate now. We have that document of security policy from GPO, so we can start collaborating with those security and identity management teams, start moving that machine level configuration out to Puppet, where now we can test, validate, and review any of those changes that are happening in our infrastructure from both our ops side and from the security side. We have both the things intertwined in the process, merging other security controls in, so when you're starting to look at, now we have to start working with additional, any other compliance methods you need to hit or security hardening. It's all part of the same things that you're going to be doing with group policy. So everything can merge together. We can get that impact before they're implemented. And we start actually moving to that proactive way of managing our infrastructure. As we're not looking at things and hoping and praying that they work at the end of it, we are actually being able to assess impact and move in a smart fashion. So that kind of brings me to a quick matter of compliance here. Kind of everything I've touched on thus far is generally in that area of compliance, right? I always talk to people that ask about it, like Puppet is a compliance engine at heart, right? You say, make me this, and it makes you that. It's very direct. It's a very easy thing. Now that can be tweaking a registry key or installing a feature, or that can be following some sort of hardening guideline for your system. But you have an audit trail, you have that ability to see what's happening over time, changes of the system, and you can enforce that things are compliant. So token reporting slide here, but the idea that we can see the changes that are taking place over time, we can see the last time something called in, we can get that green check mark, which is synonymous with thumbs up for we are compliant with whatever we're setting. So if we can export GPO and we can write our other security stuff inside of Puppet or wrap it with the DSC plugin, then we're able to essentially have our compliance code inside of Puppet, get the validation, get the testing, and get the reporting over time. PowerShell scripts. So I do like this. I like that there's a lot out there. I don't like that a lot of people are still not using version control. So it's it's getting better all the time, but there's still a lot of customers I talk to where it's people writing scripts, keeping them locally on their laptop, and this is their their safety net of how they do their job. And if there's one thing that's going to help you get to automation, it's really exposing all of that stuff as well or poorly written as it may be, getting it out there and letting people use it, improve on it together. That's something that is huge. That's huge for what you can do. So Bolt, if you're not using it, tasks in Puppet Enterprise, all that takes is your PowerShell plus a little bit of JSON to describe the inputs that you need. And that's it. So I work with people where, within 10 to 15 minutes, we're taking their PowerShell scripts, moving them into Bolt tasks. Now they're in Puppet Enterprise in a console where if people do drop down and clicking on things, they're still doing automation behind the scenes. We've abstracted all the command line stuff, but they actually are working inside of an automation framework where we have role-based access controls, we have logging, we have all those beautiful things that come with it. There, you can see tasks. So, next thing I'll touch on is patching. Who likes patching things? Okay. Yeah, who likes rebooting things? Synonymous with patching, so we're okay. So, what do we need from patching? These are the big ones, right? We need to update the Windows operating system. Easy enough. Update Microsoft applications and any non-Microsoft applications. Now, traditionally, you have two buckets here. You have what you can get through WSUS, and you have what you can't. So how do we manage those two aspects? Before that, I will ask a question. I'll ask for a raise of hands. Is Puppet a patching tool? Oh, we got a yes. How many think it's a patching tool? You do, I know. Okay, so my theory on this is Puppet is as much a patching tool as it's a replacement for SQL Server. I use Puppet to configure something, to make something consistent, to get rid of the soul-crushing parts of trying to stand it up, right? So when people ask me if it's a patching solution, it's not going to replace WSUS. It is going to get rid of a lot of the headaches around it. With that, we have modules to manage this. So you can manage your WSUS server, you can manage your client settings. We also have that capability where there's a switch here, and this, again, goes into whoever's running AD in the organization, but when you start working with Puppet and the metadata inside of Puppet and Factor and what you can do there, a lot of people build that out without thinking about what they're doing in Active Directory. So I've run into this challenge myself in the past, but we simplified and just had a single OU and drove our configuration through what we were doing in Factor. That might not work for your organization, but building those lines across how you organize things is ultimately going to allow you to slice and dice that infrastructure any way that you see fit. So I push to rely on the metadata because we can get further in infrastructure as code if we're using that metadata as we're doing it. I think the battery's getting low on that guy. So Chocolatey, these guys. If you're not using Chocolatey for the stuff outside of WSUS, I'm sorry. And again, I talk to a lot of people that are asking about it and how it works together, but this is essentially package management for Windows. This is the solution. In my mind, I'm biased and opinionated and all that fun stuff, but I don't think you should put this aside as part of your complete Windows automation solution, right? Package management is kind of awful in Windows if you're not using something. This makes it easy. This makes it an easy way to do it, and when you combine it with Puppet, you have that ability to essentially use Puppet as the rocket launcher to fire these things away. You can do the patching of any updates to applications through Chocolatey. Not sure what that was, but we're going to keep going. So how does Puppet help here? Consistent build and behavior out of your Windows Update server, consistent configuration of the clients, Windows Update settings on the clients. There's package inventory inside of Puppet Enterprise. It's something I didn't really touch on, but the ability to say, these are all the packages installed, whether they're managed by Puppet or not, and then to be able to take actions, either through applying Puppet code to resolve any issues if you need to update a package, or by using a task to say, deploy something with Chocolatey. And that's the other piece. Like, you can use Puppet as a great deployment mechanism for managing those Chocolatey packages getting deployed to the servers. There also is the OS patching module, and I was prepping to talk more about it. But I didn't have enough time, and there's 2 talks on that, and I figure you're going to get much better information from a specific talk about it. So there is an OS patching module out there, an attempt to actually be a little more prescriptive about how this should work inside of Puppet, and yes, make it a patching tool. So not an official patching tool, but anyways, it's a good idea where you can see what's there now for you. All this is available today. This isn't coming in the future. You can go home and you can start managing these various aspects of security in your infrastructure with tools that are available today. So kind of wrapping it up here, the couple of takeaways here is, Puppet is a compliance engine at heart. And so again, I see this a lot where When something goes wrong in the security organization, it's like, we need, compliance, we need compliance. Maybe not grasping the entirety of what that means, but Puppet is the thing that can ensure you get a thumbs up on a very specific control that you need. And so building that policy out with the people that are screaming about needing compliance and being able to pass audits, that's going to be a win-win situation. You just need to be able to show the value of what the tool can do and work with them to help communicate their needs into something that can work inside of the tool. Yes, you can leverage your existing investment. So I don't want to go to people anymore and be like, you should get started with Puppet on Windows. It's a great tool. Okay, let's teach you Git, let's teach you this, let's teach you that, let's teach you, let's walk you all the way up to the fact that you have to learn how to write code, especially if you're coming from just, being a very visual GUI-based worker. This is a really heavy lift. And I think Puppet as an organization has done a decent job recently with building some tooling like, being able to move those PowerShell scripts into Bolt. That's a great way to say, like, you don't need to know Puppet, you need to know, like, JSON. Can you do JSON? You can build a task. Congratulations. Easy way to get going. I can teach people that a lot easier than putting all these other pieces in place. CD for PE is another great example of that. With CD for PE, more and more as that product gets new features, there's less and less that you need to rely on a person at the command line doing a bunch of stuff in Git, and it just starts managing some of the complexity of having CI/CD inside your Puppet environment there. Third is to encourage that transparency, optional for fun and profit. But I'll always push this because we really do need to stop living in fear of infrastructure. I don't think security is hiding things from people, especially if those people have skin in the game. So I think it's a really concentrated effort that you can make and collaborate with others to know that the people that have skin in the game know what game they're actually playing. And if you can call that level set, you can start improving how well you can play the game from there. So for references, you can take a picture of this one if you want it. A couple links here, one about being able to run Puppet under service accounts and what that really looks like. Another one is a recently released article about cameras. It actually worked. How to automate Windows patching with Puppet. So it's a walk through that OS patching module and how it works. We also have a talk here. Chocolatey will be here talking about the chocolatey chocolate stuff, and I hope he throws out chocolate. There's Cadbury at their table. Go get some. And then there's a link there. That's the script that I was working on, which is right now a bunch of string substitution that I'd like to make a little more formal. If you'd like to get a look at that and see if you can break things with it, I'd love to hear some feedback. And that's what I got today. So thank you, everybody.